What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over how you can get by and still win games with less mobility in Fortnite Star Wars Galactic Battle. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below which mobility items you've been using this season. If you've just been running one item or if you've been running double. For most of this season, I have been using a lightsaber and shockwaves combined. Compared to pretty much every other recent Fortnite season, Star Wars Galactic Battle has been a struggle for a lot of players when it comes to mobility, because when you look at last season, not only did we have more mobility items in the loot pool, but we had more defined, guaranteed ways to get them. There was NPCs that sold them, you could visit the black markets, and then in the case of shockwaves, you could also get them by turning an air sprite into the shrine, which didn't work in this season until today. Today, Fortnite actually fixed it to where you can get in shockwaves from giving an air sprite to the shrines, exactly how it was last season. I tested it several times in a custom game today, and every time I put an air sprite into the shrine, I was getting 4 shockwaves every single time, exactly as it was last season. And the reason why they fixed this is actually pretty funny. So the Mandalorian Anban sniper rifle was accidentally added to the shrine loot pool with yesterday's update, the Chewbacca update. And that was not intended to be coming out until next week's Mandalorian update. And so they took the Anban sniper rifle out of the shrine loot pool, and then that's when they decided to add shockwaves back. If we didn't accidentally have that happening, we probably wouldn't be getting shockwaves out of the shrines. But as I said, it works now. You can give the shrine shocks, or you can give it an air sprite and you'll get shocks. And so landing somewhere where there are shrines is going to be somewhat preferred now. And this change definitely helps a lot. Like, mobility will be more consistent to get now than it was a few days ago, but it's still going to be more of a struggle than it was last season, because as I kind of already touched on, we had this method and more last season, and just more mobility items in general. So even if you did run out at any point in the game, you were more likely to just be able to get something off of an enemy. Like, maybe for me, for example, I liked using the drill and shockwaves. But if I ran out of shocks late in the game, maybe the enemy has a bat that I can pick up, or the rift gun, or something along those lines, you know? It's still very limited this season. It's not like you can just use your shocks constantly and not have to think about it. If you do loot your initial POI, though, and you have no shockwaves or very limited shockwaves, I would definitely keep an eye out for an air sprite and then bring it to the shrine. And you should probably make a mental note of where the shrines are in around the locations you enjoy landing, and where the sprites are around those shrines. If you don't know where the sprites are, you can actually interact with the shrine, and it'll show you where sprites are in the area. And then the flip side of this, if you have a sprite in your inventory, it'll show you where the nearby shrines are. But either way, you'll get used to it over time. And if you do actually emote while you're putting the sprite into the shrine, it will cancel the animation. So you don't have to stand there exposed a long time. Just hit an emote real quick and then cancel the emote, and you're good to go. I like this change a lot because it gives you something to do rather than just looking for more chests hoping you get lucky. Now, if you're having this problem, there is a way you can solve this problem, and it's just consistent and defined. You still do somewhat want to conserve them, though. Like I was saying, the sprite change is a huge improvement. But there's still going to be times where it's hard for you to come by mobility, or maybe you're not able to find a sprite or a shrine at the same time, or especially later on in the game, there might not be any in zone, or it might be risky to go to them. And once a shrine gets activated, it's activated for the game. Like, if somebody uses it, you can't go use it as well. So this does kind of phase out over the course of the game as people use the shrine. So you still want to be somewhat smart with your shockwaves. And that's what I was initially going to be making this video about until they made this change. The first thing that I think goes a long way in helping you conserve shockwaves this season is going to be to get a lightsaber. And I'm not the biggest fan of the lightsaber as a mobility item. Like, I wouldn't want to use it as my only mobility item. And if I was to rank all the mobility items we've ever had in Fortnite, this one would be like C tier, B tier maybe. But there are definitely situations where just one flip jump will be enough to get you where you need to be. And that will be something you can do in that situation rather than using a shockwave. So you end up saving shockwaves, and over the course of the game, you might have 3 or 4 fights like that, and that's 3 or 4 shockwaves that you ended up saving by just having the Jedi flip jump. For running away or resetting fights, being able to use a shockwave and then hit a flip jump in the air can get you a bit further and allow you to save shocks instead of just shockwaving, landing, shockwaving, landing, shockwaving, landing. You can shockwave once, do the Jedi flip, And then maybe that will create enough distance between you and the opponent for you to actually reset the fight. Again, you conserve shockwaves by doing this. And the same is going to be true for pushing. If you do need to push somebody that's decently far away or get a decent distance off a single shockwave, then shockwaving into a flip jump, you get further and then end up conserving shocks in the long run over the course of the game. And then one thing I would recommend, even if you don't really want to carry the lightsaber, like let's say you just want to use a healing item, shockwaves, and then maybe 3 guns, and that's what's ideal for you, I would still recommend getting the training if you can, because once you get the training, you have access to the mobility aspect of the lightsaber, regardless if it's the one you trained on or not. So you could talk to Mace Windu, get training from him, leave that lightsaber on the ground, and then maybe 10 minutes later in the match, you could eliminate an enemy and pick up their lightsaber, and you would still have the ability to sprint jump with the lightsaber. You would have the improved sprint, and then you would also have access to your force ability too. It doesn't matter which lightsaber you have, you'll have the force power you trained with. So you could get Mace Windu's training, later on get a Rey lightsaber, and you would have Mace Windu's ability with that lightsaber. But my main point is that, like, if you have access to the training, you should get it even if you don't want to carry the lightsaber, because you don't know later on down the line if maybe you'll be left in a situation where your choice is lightsaber or no mobility at all. And in that situation, you're going to be happy you took the few seconds to get the training. And that's another thing that really limits the mobility this season, is the fact that you need the training to have value mobility-wise out of the lightsaber. Last season, if you were carrying a bat all game, but you eliminated somebody and got their bat, you had the bat. Same with the drill, same with the rift gun. It didn't matter how you got it. If you had that item, you had access to everything it offered. With the training this season, you need the training for the lightsaber to be any decent. So even if you don't want to use it, I'd recommend getting that training, because you don't know what will happen later on down in the game. Cars will be another thing that really allow you to conserve your mobility items, and this is incredibly self-explanatory. If you're driving around in a car, you can get from point A to point B faster, and you'll be less inclined to use your mobility items, and then so you conserve them in that situation, right? But also, if you're traveling around in a car, especially in like wide open areas, you're less likely to just get caught off guard by an enemy and beamed. You're not going to be getting engaged on as much, and that would be a situation where you would have to burn mobility potentially. Like if you're running around out in the open and you start to get shot, your only choice really is shockwaving, and you might have to shockwave more than once to get out of there. On the flip side of that, if you were just driving a car, the fight probably wouldn't have started that way, and you wouldn't have had to use your mobility. So like just having a car conserves so much mobility, and it's not just down to like getting to point A to point B. You just get in, you're less likely to get punished by bad timing, and that will result in you conserving mobility. And then unfortunately, sometimes you're just going to have to decide to let people go. This is something that I don't like doing. I definitely like overchase people in this game at times, but with mobility being more limited this season than it was last, you're going to have to just let people leave sometimes and then deal with them later on. A lot of times just letting somebody leave is much better than using 2 or 3 shockwaves to chase them and then end up getting none in return. It just is the way the game goes. The final thing I'm going to talk about is going to be forecast. The forecast towers spawn in like 30 seconds into second zone. You eliminate the guards, bring the key card to the computer, you get to see zone reveal for the rest of the game. And this is just always helpful in a battle royale. Knowing where zone is makes it easier for you to play the game. I rarely care that much about getting it in public matches with how I play and how aggressive I play. Typically, the game is pretty dead by the time endgame rolls around. But if you prefer to play a bit slower and not get in as many fights, getting forecast is really beneficial in a season where there's less mobility. Because if you have all the mobility in the world, it's not that hard for you to get to zone. And so like you don't really have to think about it, right? But also it's easier for other people to get to zone too. So going to zone first grants you less of an advantage. This season, with mobility being more limited, if you know where zone is and you can position yourself accordingly, you're going to save mobility that you might not have to use to get there. But also the fact that the enemies will have less mobility means that you getting to zone first to be able to hold them will give you more of an advantage than it would in a season with just like an insane amount of mobility. Like last season, for example, people would be shockwaving in a zone, drilling in a zone, rifting in a zone, and it's not like you were just going to hold the entire lobby as they ran at you. But this season, when it comes to endgame, it might get down to times where the enemies have no movement at all, and they just have to run at you. And if you get to zone first, that's going to be an easy elimination. So getting forecast, I think, is more beneficial the less mobility there is, but it's always somewhat good. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.